This is not the kind of story that trends for the wrong reasons. There are no leaked clips, no courtroom chaos, no explosive accusations. And yet, somehow, this story hits harder than most scandals ever could. Because this time, the pain was not hidden behind rumors. It was spoken directly, quietly, and courageously by a young woman who has lived her entire life under a name the world already thinks it knows. Fantasia Barrino's daughter did not scream for attention. She whispered her truth. And the internet stopped to listen. At only 23 years old, Zion Barrino stepped forward with a confession that instantly shifted the tone of every conversation around her. 60 days sober. 2 simple words. Sobriety and survival. Words that carry weight, especially when spoken by someone raised under constant observation. She did not frame it as a victory parade. She called it one of the hardest battles of her life. And that honesty cracked something open across social media. Comments flooded in. Some were supportive. Some were stunned. Others quietly admitted they were fighting the same demons in silence. This moment did not come from chaos. It came from exhaustion. Zion spoke about being physically ill for weeks, about pushing through days that felt impossible, about leaning on faith when her own strength was gone. She spoke about community, about family, about choosing healing even when nobody demanded an explanation. That choice alone speaks volumes. In a world addicted to spectacle, she offered vulnerability instead. And that is why this story refuses to be ignored. But to understand why her words cut so deeply, you have to understand the life she was born into. Zion did not choose fame. Fame chose her before she could walk, before she could speak, before she could protect herself from opinions. As the daughter of Fantasia Barrino, her existence has always lived in the shadow of a public narrative. Too close to the spotlight to be invisible. Too distant to be truly understood. Every phase of her life unfolded beside a mother whose own struggles were dissected by strangers. Fantasia Barrino rose to fame as a teenager, carrying talent, trauma, and pressure all at once. Her battles with poverty, public judgment, and emotional collapse played out on a global stage. And while the world watched Fantasia survive, rebuild, and rise again, a child was growing up behind the scenes, absorbing every shockwave. That is the part rarely discussed. Children of public redemption stories often inherit the silence, the instability, and the emotional cost without ever consenting to the narrative. Zion grew up navigating family transitions, emotional uncertainty, and the strange experience of being talked about instead of spoken to. Online commentary did not pause to ask how it felt. Headlines never considered what it meant to grow up while your mother's pain became public property. That kind of environment shapes you. It teaches you to hide, to endure, to survive quietly. And sometimes, survival turns into coping mechanisms that hurt more than they heal. When Zion posted her message, she did not expose anyone. She did not shift blame. She did not dramatize her pain. And that restraint made the impact stronger. Social media noticed immediately. People praised her courage. Others admitted they never expected such honesty from someone so young. Some even criticized the fact that she shared it all, proving exactly why silence feels safer for so many people struggling behind curated images. But here is the twist that changes everything. Zion did not just speak about herself. She extended her hand outward. She invited conversation. She offered help. She acknowledged that addiction and illness do not discriminate, even when your last name carries fame. That single gesture reframed the entire narrative. This was no longer about being Fantasia Barrino's daughter. This was about a young woman reclaiming her own voice. In an era where celebrity families are often reduced to gossip, Zion chose responsibility over spectacle, healing over performance, growth over attention. And in doing so, she challenged the very culture that raised her. Her story is not about scandal. It is about pressure. It is about what happens when survival finally demands honesty. And it is about the courage it takes to choose recovery while the world watches, judges, and waits for you to fail. This is not the end of her story. It is the beginning of her taking control of it. And sometimes, the most shocking thing a person can do in the public eye is tell the truth without embellishment, without excuses, and without fear. For the first time, Zion was not being spoken about. She was speaking for herself. And that distinction matters more than people realize. From the moment she entered this world, her identity was stitched into a story that was already unfolding in public. Long before she could understand fame, her life was tethered to her mother's rise, fall, and resurrection. Fantasia Barrino became a household name as a teenager, thrust into sudden stardom while simultaneously battling poverty, instability, and relentless public judgment. As Fantasia fought to rebuild her life piece by piece, a child was growing up inside that turbulence, absorbing it quietly, without headlines to explain what it felt like. While the world consumed Fantasia's story as entertainment, Zion lived it as reality. Those years were not tabloid moments to her. They were childhood memories shaped by uncertainty, emotional shifts, and survival mode. Recovery inside a household does not arrive neatly packaged. It comes with transitions, relapses of fear, and constant adjustment. Zion's environment was defined by resilience, yes, but also by instability that children are rarely equipped to process out loud. She did not experience her mother's struggles as inspirational arcs. She experienced them as a child trying to feel safe while life kept changing. Growing up with a famous parent does not simply mean privilege. It means losing anonymity before identity has fully formed. Privacy becomes conditional. Assumptions replace understanding. Strangers feel entitled to opinions that were never invited. Even when comments are not directed at the child, they still land. They linger. They shape how a young person sees themselves. Zion's name surfaced repeatedly in conversations that were never about her choices, yet she still carried the weight of them. Being discussed instead of protected creates a quiet form of exposure that follows a child into adulthood. Fantasia has spoken openly about wanting to shield her children from the chaos of public life. She worked intentionally to create structure, safety, and boundaries. But public narratives are not erased by good intentions. Once a story exists online, it becomes permanent. For Zion, separating her own identity from a narrative she never authored became an ongoing internal battle. As Fantasia moved forward and married Kendall Taylor, the family entered a new chapter. Blended families can bring stability, but they also demand emotional flexibility. New roles, new expectations, and unresolved history collide under one roof. For a young adult already navigating self-discovery, these transitions can feel heavy, even when love is present. There is an unspoken burden that often falls on children of resilient parents. When survival becomes a legacy, strength is expected to be inherited automatically. Fantasia's journey is one of public humiliation, mental health struggles, and eventual healing. It is powerful, but power can cast a long shadow. For Zion, strength may not have looked loud or victorious. It may have looked like silence. It may have looked like coping in private. And eventually, it looked like recognizing that something was wrong and choosing to confront it before it consumed her future. Zion came of age in a generation that does not get to struggle quietly. Every moment is documented. Every absence is questioned. Every imperfection is magnified. Social media does not simply observe young people. It molds them. It rewards performance over authenticity and visibility over wellness. For someone with a recognizable last name, the pressure multiplies. Expectations appear out of nowhere. Comparisons become constant. The line between personal growth and public consumption disappears. In that environment, unhealthy behaviors can masquerade as normal coping mechanisms, quietly reinforced by likes, silence, or indifference. Silence in the digital age is often misread as failure. Vulnerability is frequently mistaken for weakness. Young people are trained to perform happiness rather than seek help. Zion's generation has grown up watching breakdowns turn into viral moments and recoveries become content. Against that backdrop, choosing sobriety is not just a personal decision. It is an act of defiance. It requires self-awareness, discipline, and the courage to sit with pain without numbing it. Choosing that path publicly invites scrutiny, accountability, and judgment all at once. When Zion shared her sobriety milestone, she did more than announce recovery. She reclaimed control. She refused to let speculation define her. She acknowledged struggle without allowing it to become her identity. That choice reflects maturity far beyond her years. It signals a refusal to repeat cycles quietly and a willingness to confront discomfort early rather than letting it explode later. In a culture obsessed with appearances, Zion chose truth. And sometimes, the most powerful rebellion is choosing healing when the world expects performance. Zion's decision to speak did not happen in isolation. It reflects a deeper cultural shift unfolding among younger generations, a rejection of the old belief that pain must be hidden to be respected. For decades, strength was defined by endurance and silence, by carrying wounds privately and calling it resilience. Zion chose something different. She chose visibility. And in doing so, she disrupted the narrative that suffering must remain unseen to be valid. Her honesty reframed strength as courage, courage to be witnessed in moments that are unfinished, uncomfortable, and deeply human. By sharing her sobriety milestone, Zion did more than mark time. She turned a personal victory into a collective mirror. Her words reached people who recognized themselves in her struggle, people who have counted days quietly, who have stumbled, restarted, and questioned their own worth along the way. Her message carried an unspoken reassurance: recovery does not move in straight lines. Progress is not erased by setbacks. Choosing yourself, again and again, is worth the discomfort, even when it costs pride, familiarity, or approval. Throughout her reflection, faith and family were not presented as decorative concepts. They appeared as lifelines. as anchors in moments where self-belief may have faltered. Faith, as Zion described it, was not a shield that erased pain. It was a presence that remained when the noise quieted, offering grace when she could not extend it to herself. It reminded her that her life carried meaning beyond her lowest moments, beyond mistakes that once felt defining. Family support functioned not as distant encouragement but as active participation, creating an environment where vulnerability was met with understanding instead of judgment. Fantasia Barrino has long spoken about her own battles with despair, survival, and spiritual renewal. Faith has never been a performance in her story. It has been a foundation. And that foundation appears to have shaped Zion's recovery not through pressure, but through example. Witnessing someone confront darkness and still choose to live, to heal, and to hope leaves an imprint deeper than advice ever could. Zion's acknowledgement of that influence reveals something powerful. Healing, when lived honestly, becomes generational. It teaches that pain does not cancel purpose and that brokenness and strength are not opposites. What makes Zion's journey especially striking is not simply the choice of sobriety, but the world in which that choice was made. This is a culture that celebrates excess, numbs discomfort, and often rewards escape over self-reflection. Choosing clarity within that environment is a radical act. It requires sitting with unresolved emotions, confronting patterns that once offered relief, and redefining joy without external validation. For someone raised under public scrutiny, the challenge multiplies. Every decision risks interpretation. Every boundary invites opinion. Separating genuine need from public noise demands discipline and self-respect. Zion's willingness to do that work, first quietly and then openly, speaks to a depth of awareness that is easy to overlook. Her transparency also dismantles a damaging myth surrounding recovery, the belief that healing follows a universal formula or ends with a clean resolution. She did not present herself as cured or complete. She presented herself as committed. By doing so, she removed the illusion of perfection that often discourages people from beginning their own journeys. Her story creates space. Space for grace. Space for compassion. Space for people to admit they are still becoming. And in a culture obsessed with finished narratives and polished outcomes, Zion offered something far more honest. She showed that healing is not a destination. It is a relationship with oneself, renewed daily, chosen even when it feels uncomfortable, and sustained through faith, support, and truth. In many ways, Zion's story lands at the center of a cultural reckoning that can no longer be ignored. A generation raised under constant digital exposure is confronting mental and emotional strain at unprecedented levels, and the old scripts no longer work. Silence no longer equals strength. Performance no longer equals wellness. In this climate, Zion's honesty offers an alternative path. One rooted not in image management, but in accountability, faith, and genuine connection. Her words cut through the noise to remind people that behind every curated image is a human being carrying invisible battles. By choosing to heal openly, she created ripples far beyond herself. This was not just an announcement. It was an example. A declaration that inner peace matters more than external approval. At its core, her journey reinforces a truth many people struggle to accept. Legacy is not only inherited. It is chosen. Zion's last name may have opened doors and invited scrutiny, but her decisions belong to her alone. By choosing sobriety, transparency, and faith, she claimed ownership of her future. She demonstrated that while the past may shape us, it does not have to cage us. In telling her story on her own terms, she reclaimed her narrative, not as someone crushed by expectation, but as someone actively shaping her life with intention, courage, and grace. Equally powerful was her acknowledgement of the people who stood beside her. Recovery rarely unfolds in isolation, even when it appears quiet from the outside. It is built in private conversations, in moments of physical weakness, in hands that steady you when your own strength falters. Zion recognized that truth without hesitation. Her words reflected an understanding that healing is not about proving independence. It is about accepting connection. In a culture that glorifies self-sufficiency to an unhealthy extreme, her message quietly challenges the myth that strength means doing everything alone. Sometimes strength looks like vulnerability. Sometimes it looks like allowing others to see you while you are still learning how to stand. What makes Zion's story resonate so deeply is its refusal to package recovery as a clean transformation. There is no dramatic before and after. No claim that everything is suddenly fixed. Instead, there is honesty about process. Healing arrives in fragments. Some days feel like progress. Some feel stagnant. Others feel like regression. Zion's experience reflects that reality. The illness she faced, both physical and emotional, did not come with instructions. Neither did the path forward. There were moments of uncertainty, moments of fear, moments of wondering how much of herself would remain intact. These are questions many people carry silently, terrified of appearing weak or ungrateful. By speaking them aloud, Zion made room for others to do the same without shame. Public perception adds another layer of pressure that cannot be understated. Growing up under a recognizable name creates expectations that outsiders rarely see but insiders feel constantly. For much of her life, Zion existed beneath narratives written by others. Assumptions about who she should be, how she should behave, what her life should represent. Navigating illness and recovery within that framework requires an additional kind of resilience. There is pressure to reassure, to perform strength, to protect an image that may not align with internal reality. Zion's decision to speak honestly disrupted that cycle. It repositioned her story as her own, not an extension of someone else's legacy or the public's projections. In this context, sobriety becomes more than abstinence. It becomes clarity, choice, presence. It is the decision to face life without numbing or avoidance. For Zion, reaching a sobriety milestone marked a commitment to self-awareness and accountability. It was a promise to remain present even when presence feels uncomfortable. Sobriety demands emotional exposure. It requires learning new ways to cope when old habits no longer apply. In a culture that glamorizes excess and minimizes dependency, that choice is exhausting and brave. Zion's acknowledgement of this chapter adds depth to her story, reminding others that recovery is not about perfection. It is about persistence. Family transitions have also shaped her journey in complex ways. Families evolve. They fracture. They repair. They redefine themselves over time. For someone whose family dynamics have unfolded in public view, these changes carry added intensity. Private growth becomes public speculation. Personal boundaries are misunderstood or criticized. Yet within those transitions lies the opportunity for self-definition. Zion's story suggests she is learning how to relate to her family as an individual, not as a role. That process requires boundaries, forgiveness, and sometimes distance, all of which can coexist with love. Untangling identity from expectation is never easy, especially when those expectations are reinforced by both family history and public memory. The illness she endured acted as an interruption she could not ignore. Illness has a way of stripping life down to its essentials. It slows time. It alters priorities. It exposes vulnerabilities distraction once concealed. For Zion, this period appears to have forced reflection. How she was living. What she was avoiding. What needed to change. These moments are rarely chosen, but they often become catalysts. They ask uncomfortable questions that demand honest answers. Zion's willingness to sit with those questions rather than outrun them reveals a depth of introspection many people never reach. Asking for help is often the most difficult step in healing, especially for those conditioned to carry pain quietly. Zion's recognition of her support system challenges the belief that help diminishes autonomy. It does not. It expands it. Accepting support is not surrender. It is collaboration. For those who feel responsible for maintaining an image of strength, this choice can feel terrifying. By acknowledging the people who stood beside her, Zion modeled a healthier narrative, one where care is reciprocal and vulnerability is not failure, but a bridge toward growth.